Good evening and welcome one and all to this very special occasion. My name is Michael Garrett and I am president of the Society of Columbia Graduates. As I look around this magnificent room, I am quite sure that we have not seen such a concentration of intellect and distinction on Morningside since Jacques Barzun dined alone at the Terrace restaurant. This evening we have in our midst more revered recipients of the great teacher awards, more distinguished deans, admirable administrators, profound professors, and other impeccable intellectuals than you can shake an honorary degree at. I will now make the unforgivable mistake of naming just a few of them. Jacques Barzun and one of our guests both did spectacularly well at Columbia College. Both went on to named professorships, both held the title dean and served as university provost, and both resumed teaching after their administrative adventures, which in Michael Sovereign's case involved 13 years as president of the university. Please welcome Michael Sovereign. We also have with us 4 other current and emeritus trustees of the university, who I understand have many Michael Sovereign stories to tell. They are Kenneth Ford, Anna Longobardo, Connie Mattiati, and Michael Rothfeld. Please welcome them. The Society of Columbia Graduates is composed of alumni of Columbia College and the Fu Foundation School of Engineering and Applied Science, who have devoted time and energy to Columbia for at least 10 years. The Great Teachers Award is bestowed upon faculty teaching undergraduates at those schools. Enthusiastic engagement by their deans has been critical each year to identifying potential new members and potential Great Teacher Award recipients. To thank all of the past and present deans of both schools, please recognize with me Austin Quigley, Dean of the College, and Gerald Navratil, Interim Dean of SEAS. If I introduced everyone in attendance with critical Columbia responsibilities, dinner would get cold. But I will note that we have with us 4 Executive Vice Presidents: Susan Fagan for Development and Alumni Relations, Joseph Iannuzzo for Facilities, David Stone for Communications and Public Affairs, and Lee Goldman for Health and Biomedical Science. We also have 4 other deans of school: Mark Wigley for Architecture, Planning, and Preservation, Lee Goldman for Health Sciences and Medicine, Peter Awn for General Studies, and Henry Pinkham for the Graduate School of Arts and Sciences. Let's recognize all of these Columbia leaders. We are honored to have with us this evening 9 great teachers whose names can be found on bronze plaques on either side of the Teaching Lion sculpture in the Robert Rosencrantz Reading Room in Butler Library. Thank you, Bob. Because they have been recognized as exemplars of great teaching by receiving the Great Teacher Award. They are Gerald Atesian, Peter Awn, Alan Brinkley, Ted DeBerry, Mort Friedman, Donald Goldfarb, Henry Graff, Ken Jackson, and Amaya Sen. Finally, we have received many wonderful communications from friends, colleagues, and admirers of Jacques Barzun. From amongst them, I will refer to one and read another. The reference is to Arthur Crystal, who is here with us this evening and who has written a magnificent essay on Jacques Barzun in this week's New Yorker. We all thank you for this wonderful piece. What I will read is part of a letter from University Professor Emeritus and Great Teacher Award recipient, the eminent historian Fritz Stern. I wish I could be with my Columbia colleagues celebrating Jacques Barzun. A lecture commitment made over a year ago makes it impossible. For over 6 decades, Jacques has been my teacher, mentor, and friend. My debt to him is joyously incalculable. I would want to congratulate him on all his life and its greatness, and I want to congratulate Columbia on the privilege of having had Jacques as our own, the homegrown universalist, in our midst for so long. We should show our gratitude for his presence by adhering to his precepts. In spirit, I raise my glass to Jacques with love and admiration. Most people consider themselves fulfilled if they even have a modicum of success in one of their major professional endeavors. Alan Brinkley has succeeded brilliantly in 3 daunting careers: teaching as Alan Nevins Professor of History, for which he received the Great Teacher Award in 2003, and numerous visiting appointments and fellowships over the years; writing at least 5 major books and countless reviews and articles, in the course of which he received the National Book Award; and shaping academic policy, procedure, and pedagogy at Columbia, and selecting the people who are its future. As a fellow great teacher, writer, and provost, Jacques Barzun, I am delighted to give you our co-host of this celebration, Alan Brinkley.
Thank you, Michael, and I want to welcome everyone here tonight. Every meeting of the Society of Columbia Graduates at the Great Teacher Award Dinner is a special event for Columbia. It honors some of our most distinguished and loyal alumni and some of our most talented teachers. But tonight's event is particularly special for this organization because tonight we honor another great teacher who was also perhaps the greatest scholar and intellectual of the 20th century, a friend, a colleague, in my case, a predecessor, who represents everything that we believe Columbia should represent. Jacques Barzun spent his entire career at Columbia, beginning as an undergraduate, and no one, I think, has illuminated the university and enhanced its reputation more effectively than Jacques Barzun. I'm thrilled to see so many people here tonight who knew him, who remember him, members of the family, former students, former colleagues, and all of us are delighted to be able to play this small part in celebrating not just Jacques' 100th birthday, but Jacques' extraordinary career. I would like to read a message from President Bollinger, who regrets that he cannot be here tonight, but asked me to read this on his behalf. To the Society of Columbia Graduates, I regret not being able to join you for this evening's celebration of Jacques Barzun, our beloved centenarian. I am, however, grateful for this opportunity to have a few words expressed on my behalf. It is altogether natural on an occasion like this to focus with admiration and envy, perhaps, on one of our fellow creatures reaching that rare milestone of 100 years. How did he do it, we ask? Was it a secret diet, a certain exercise routine, or his ability to manage stress? Too often, I'm afraid, this line of thinking devolves into a celebration of survival, a mere beating of the odds. This is particularly inapt when it comes to the life of Jacques Barzun. Indeed, when reflecting on his century of excellence, I am fascinated by an entirely different set of numbers. For example, how many books can someone with Jacques' appetite for learning read in 100 years? How many years of human history can he hold in his mind all at once without losing sight of their sameness and difference? How many lives can a teacher of his ability touch, slightly or forever, if given the same allotment of time with which to work? What is remarkable about Jacques' century is that he has used every one of his years on earth to multiply his understanding of all years on earth across recorded time and space, and in doing so he has expanded his reach through the living futures that have read his great works and studied those of others in his classrooms. Despite any titles to the contrary, his is a life of eternal dawn. For his service to Columbia and to the core curriculum, for his devotion to the highest standards of teaching and scholarship, for his steadfastness to the liberal arts no matter the fashion, and for his exuberance in seeing every year as a new opportunity to learn, not just to survive. For all of this, I salute Jacques Barzun and send greetings to all those who have gathered to toast the elegance, consistency, and model of excellence that is his life. No amount of years will ever catch up to its true value. Sincerely, Lee C. Bollinger. My own relationship with Jacques has been slight. I met him on a few occasions when he returned to Columbia after I arrived here. And once I became provost, I began receiving occasional letters from Jacques, giving me advice and admonitions. But he has been, even though I never knew him very well, he's been a kind of model to me, as was my colleague Fritz Stern, who also served as provost and is also a great historian. Jacques was, of course, an extraordinary historian who served as provost, but nevertheless retained his position as a major scholar. Jacques' brilliance, perhaps, was never better revealed when he chose to leave the job of provost in 1967 and returned to teaching and scholarship, and of course continued to write and publish up until just a few years ago. We will have a number of speakers later tonight who are friends, colleagues, students of Jacques, who will talk about his influence on them and on this university. Enjoy your dinner, and thank you all again for coming.
I am delighted to announce that each of our guests will be handed a DVD copy of the video as they leave this evening. And a special thank you to Jim Neal, Michael Ryan, Jude Weber, Henry Graff, Catherine Pope, and Vincent Aliberto for your masterful work in researching, writing, directing, narrating, and producing this moving video. And now, I wish all of you a savory meal and delicious conversation. The program will resume when the former is consumed and the latter is concluded. Ladies and gentlemen, our co-host, Alan Brinkley, will now have the honor and pleasure of introducing our distinguished speakers. I would ask Dean Quigley, Professors DuBarry, Graff, and Jackson to join us on the stage at this time. Thank you.
We have the incredible privilege tonight of being able to hear from 4 members of our faculty and our community who will talk to us about Jacques Barzun and their memories of him or his influence on them. And I'll introduce each of them in turn, and each of them will speak briefly about Jacques, and then we'll move on to the next part of the ceremony. So let me begin by introducing our first speaker, Austin Quigley. Austin came to Columbia in 1990 as a member of the English department, and he holds today a remarkable series of titles. He is the Henry L. and Lucy C. Moses Professor of English and the Brander Matthews Professor of Dramatic Literature, and of course the Dean of the College, which he has been since 1995, during which time he's overseen one of the most impressive periods in the entire history of Columbia College, both in terms of its growth and its distinction, and in terms of the extraordinary popularity of Columbia College among some of the finest students in the United States. So it's my very great pleasure to introduce to you the Dean of the College, Austin Quigley.
Good evening, and let me add my welcome to everyone. It seems particularly appropriate that we celebrate the 100th birthday of Jacques Barzun in the same semester that we celebrate the 100th anniversary of Hamilton Hall, the longtime home of Columbia College. And it seems to me those two anniversaries occurring at the same time seems entirely appropriate. Now, in order to celebrate the 100 years of Hamilton Hall, we spent about 2 years renovating the building as our tribute to Hamilton Hall. And of course, it doesn't seem that there's an obvious equivalent to renovating Jacques at this point, but also quite a clear indication, of course, that we need to shift vocabularies and recognize that tonight's event is really a way of recognizing what goes on at Columbia all of the time. In one sense, we're always renovating what Jacques left behind to us because we're always renewing, reviving, reinforcing all of the ideas, attitudes, beliefs, convictions that were expressed by him in his day and continue to influence so much of what we do on a day-to-day basis at the college in particular and at Columbia in general. Now, 100 years is a rather long time, as we all know, and I was thinking to myself that wonderful DVD that we appreciated so much and that we're all going to treasure as a memento of this evening and as a way of continuing our endless conversation with Jacques, is left out one very large thing, as a small, short video will have to do. And it left out, of course, the Great War, as it was called at the time, and World War I. And for a young man born in France and then coming to the United States in that period, World War I loomed very large indeed. And he himself commented at several points on what it was like to come of age at Columbia in that period. There was, he noted, a very influential group of college undergraduates who had been veterans of the war, who were veterans of the war. There was a significant number of junior faculty who had seen active service during the war. And there were 2 or 3 key faculty members who had participated in discussions to do with the Treaty of Versailles that ended the war and with the attempts to found the League of Nations thereafter. So the war was very much around for a long, long time during Jacques' formative years at Columbia. And it's interesting to see the occasional metaphor slipping into his language about describing his time at Columbia. There is a wonderful phrase that I seized upon immediately that says, when he was describing what he thought of as his mode of teaching, and he said, "I believe in hand-to-hand," and you can see where the phrase is going to go, right? But it doesn't quite go there. "I believe in hand-to-hand, mind-to-mind encounters as an indispensable part of teaching." So it wasn't quite hand-to-hand combat, but the phrase was at the back of that. But it did mean, of course, that the teaching encounter was going to be very direct, very engaging, very personal, and he advocated constantly small classes, seminars, debate, all of those things which are now absolutely central to much of the optional part of Columbia College's curriculum, but absolutely central, vitally central to all of the required part in our core curriculum. Now, the interesting thing about being at an undergraduate college is, of course, that however much you may find yourself agreeing with the old adage that history started badly and got steadily worse, you spend your time, as I do as college dean, surrounded on a day-to-day basis by 4,000 of the best, the brightest, the smartest, the most energetic, the most idealistic young people on the face of the globe. They bring to the campus on a daily basis those 2 vital elements of idealism and hope that makes us constantly feel that we can somehow manage to transcend the worst of human history and be as human beings, not just what we know we can collectively as a species be at our worst, but also to encounter on a daily basis with these young people the aspirations renewed generation after generation of what we can be at our best. And aspirations not just arbitrarily plucked from the sky of what we might be as human beings at our best, but aspirations that are based upon a record, that other record in history of what human beings can in fact be at their very best. And behind that attempt to try to ward off the worst of what we can be and to help us reach towards the best of what we can be, from that little equation emerges the notion of a great books course, and a book and courses in what we have been best in terms of art, music, literature, philosophy, and all of those enterprises of the human mind and the human spirit that remind us indeed that as a species we are not beyond redemption, and that the part of us, the part of our history that occasionally relates us to the gods and not always to whatever the alternative term is, that somehow or other a great books course, a course in debate, in intense exchange with some of the best and brightest minds and voices of the past, that is the way in which we can renew, preserve, and encourage the endless aspiration of the human race to be at its best and not at its worst. So all of that, it seems to me, is a significant part of what was driving his own thinking, that World War, his own comment that in fact the School of Political Science at Columbia was founded, he noted, by a veteran of the Civil War in the United States, John Burgess, who said himself that sitting in a trench in the Civil War, thinking to himself about the carnage around him and saying, you know, if we'd had better educated political leaders all the way down the line, we wouldn't be here fighting this war today. So he founded the School of Political Science, partly motivated by that. The Great Books course has many motivations behind it. We have some historians to my left here and many in the room who will tell us quite rightly there are no single causes for anything that anyone does with their lives. But the Great War seems to me an important context for us to remind ourselves of what we were trying to ward off when we built the curriculum at Columbia College and what we're trying to achieve when we think of what we all could be at our best and what the young people around us could be at their very, very best. So what I would like to close with is a remark by Jacques about what good teaching consisted of, because it seems to me to be the same now as it was then. And he says this: really great teachers must be willing to work like dogs. With small discussion groups, they must be well informed, very interested in students, conscientious in their preparation, committed to the idea of disciplinary work, and idealistic to a fault. That's the great teacher. This Society of Columbia graduates, year after year, has recognized great Columbia teachers because the Society recognizes that this institution stands or falls in terms of its responsibility to society in general and to the young of today by what it does in the classroom, by how we preserve and nurture the ideals and aspirations and hopes of our young people. And when we gather in a classroom at Columbia and students gather in the core curriculum, they're talking not just to each other, and they're not just responding to the voices of the people who wrote those great books. They're continuing the conversation with Jacques and his colleagues at the time, who created the structure of the curriculum that continues to shape the way in which we think about how we bring out the best in our students and how we create the best selves of all of us in this Columbia community. I'm so delighted to be part of this evening, and I'm delighted to see members of the family here who will be introduced later. And I want to say congratulations to Jacques Barzun, one of Columbia's great teachers. Thank you.
And we turn now to my former colleague and great friend, Henry Graff. Henry Graff, who earned his PhD in history at Columbia in 1949, taught at Columbia for decades after that, including the country's first course on the history of the presidency, a field of which he is one of the leading examples. Henry is also one of the extraordinary citizens of Columbia University and has served in so many different roles at Columbia, both during his time on the faculty and since, that it's almost impossible to list all the ways in which he's contributed to the life of Columbia. He himself is a winner of the Great Teacher Award, a great and dedicated teacher for many decades, a wonderful colleague, a wonderful friend, and of course, like all of us, a great admirer of Jacques Barzun. Henry?
It's a great pleasure to be here to help Jacques celebrate his 100th birthday. Jacques is the only polymath I have ever known. Now, the dictionary says a polymath is someone who is conversant and knowledgeable in several fields. Jacques was very unusual. He knew everything. And that is one of the glories of his presentations to so many hundreds of audiences throughout the country. I first met Jacques about 62 years ago. I was still in uniform. And he was so very friendly to me that I especially appreciated him, because I must tell you, shortly after the attack on Pearl Harbor, I enlisted in the Army. And I told my professor, Alan Nevins, that I was going into the service and that I would not be around for a long time. And he said to me, "Congratulations, congratulations. I hope you see action soon." Now, we don't talk to students that way any longer. But those words banged around in my head for 4 years. So meeting Jacques and finding him delighted, it was Harry Carman who introduced us, that I was going to be a member of the department, and I didn't have to worry any longer about what would happen in the military. In the early 50s, Jacques was invited to give the mandatory course for MA and PhD candidates. It was known famously as History 201. And he invited me to help him give that course, to be his partner, his co-teacher. I have no idea why he chose me. I must tell you, though, I was not awed by him because I had never been a student of his. The students were terrified often of Jacques, fearing that they would have to answer some question that he put without adequate knowledge and without adequate sensibility. I was to lecture in alternate hours with Jacques and to emphasize American history, and he was going to talk European history. And we did that for 2 years together. And we had our lectures stenotyped. Now that's an old-fashioned word, isn't it? And we took the document that resulted from the stenotyping, and we passed it along to Lionel Trilling to read. And he read it critically. And we made such changes as we thought were worthy, and we sent it off to the publisher. That was the first edition of our book, The Modern Researcher. It has now gone through 6 editions, And the sixth edition, Jacques and I did when he was well over 90 years old. I found no lack of energy, no lack of new ideas, no lack of what the public would require from us as we rewrote that book for the sixth time. We have now sold 1 million copies. I don't know how long Jacques... I don't know how long Jacques will wait before he says, you know, we ought to do a seventh. We shall see. I must tell you, while I don't know why Jacques picked me out, and certainly it wasn't my military history, I didn't compare to the great generals and military people Jacques knew about so well as he studied Prussia and Napoleon. But I must tell you, I remember going into his office very early in our relationship, and he had on the wall a well-framed royalty check. And it was handsome. It occupied that alone. The wall didn't have anything else on it. And there was Jacques' caption for this check, written on the matting. It said, "The wages of scholarship." The check was for 35 cents from a leading New York publisher for something Jacques had done. And that taught me what I was already beginning to learn, that no matter how golden your performance in the academy, it is not rewarded with money. I must also tell you that Jacques was always interested in what I was writing. And not long after we finished our association in History 201, I was writing an American history, and Jacques knew that, and he said, you know, I'd like to be reading along with you because Isabel, who's right over here, is studying American history, and I like to be in touch with all the details that I'm sure she's acquiring. And so he read The Galleys, and I must tell you, his comments on this and that throughout this long book were much more important to the world than my book, and much more interesting. The most powerful was a statement that he wrote next to a quotation I had drawn from a secondary source, quoting Lincoln. And he wrote, "This is not Lincoln's music." My first reaction was, he's a musicologist, but that wasn't the point. He also had done a book on Lincoln. And I spent the next 2 weeks trying to find the original source from which the secondary writer had taken these words. And when I found it, Jacques, of course, was right. There was a whole phrase missing, and 2 words had been changed. I don't know anybody else who could have read that manuscript, that set of galleys, with the wisdom and the intensity and the line-by-line assertions of Jacques Barzun. There are many other experiences that I had with Jacques. I must tell you that he wrote on every subject. You know, he wrote a book on science, which he called The Glorious Entertainment. He wrote God's Country and Mine, which was commentary on what he had found in America. He wrote The House of Intellect. He wrote a book on the American University. He wrote a book on naval affairs for use with the V-12 program during the Second World War. Name it, Jacques wrote on it. He wrote a book on French poetry was designed for people who read English poetry. And of course, his use of language, which was a second language to him, the English language, is embodied in that great little book that he wrote and that has been quoted everywhere. It's a sense that has forced William Safire to send him in advance each week the column that will shortly appear in the Sunday magazine. Some of you, I hope, saw what Safire had to say about Jacques in the last issue of the magazine. But of all the things that Jacques has written, and the Columbia Library has 123 citations in the catalog for Jacques Barzun, of all the things, of all the quotes that you and I have perhaps exchanged tonight, the one that is in all quotation books is his statement, "Whoever wants to know the mind and heart of America should first learn baseball." Now, that, Jacques, by the way, has read, I think, almost everything that I ever wrote, but he's never read all my baseball pieces. He knows, though, that I am very devoted to following baseball. And that phrase, that quote, is on the wall of the Hall of Fame up in Cooperstown. It has been used on season's tickets. It has been used on the Hall of Fame restaurant wall outside of Paris. Every sportscaster who quotes anything quotes Jacques at some time during the year. About 5 years ago, when Jacques went up to Cooperstown, New York, and he was, of course, 95, to deliver a lecture at the Glimmerglass Opera, which he did every year, he thought he'd like also to go up to the Hall of Fame Museum, and he did. And when he went up there, he saw his words on the wall. When they knew that this was the author, this was Jacques Barzun, he was treated like that famous archaeologist who used to scream when he found gold masses in digging up Troy. He was a found man. And very shortly, after long conversations with Jacques, I'd love to have been a fly on the wall for those conversations. They said, "Is there anything more?" He said, "Yes, I'd like to know where the gift shop is." And, "Oh, what do you want?" He wanted a baseball bat. You don't think of Jacques buying a baseball bat, or I don't think he paid for that one, and I hope he didn't, because a week or two later in Cotuit, and the family was present, I was at lunch, and Jacques presented me with this bat. And I said, "Jacques, that is a wonderful thing to get from you. Would you autograph it?" Well, Jacques knew where you autograph a baseball bat, and with indelible ink, he wrote his name. Last year, as Jacques was approaching 99, I called the Baseball Hall of Fame, and I said, "I have a bat that is signed, autographed by Jacques Barzun. I don't think he has ever swung it, but I do believe it ought to be in your collection." So he wrote me, "Send it up, and we will pass it along to our gift committee." Well, the gift committee, about 3 months later, wrote me that they were just delighted to have this bat. And subsequently, the president of the Hall of Fame wrote to Jacques telling him that that bat was now in their collection. Now, I do not know where that bat is going to be displayed. My own strong belief is that it ought to stand next to Babe Ruth's. I don't know what will be written on the little note attached to that bat for the public to see. But I'd like to say it's much on my mind. Not always, but it's on my mind. And in addition, on this day, I think of the 100 or more men and women who've been honored with the great title of Great Teacher by this organization. And as Jacques is introduced, I'd like to think of all those people gathered together somewhere, seeing Jacques Barzun, the tall, handsome, brilliant intellectual with the international and national reputations, inducted into this same group. And when he comes in, they will know that he is the Babe Ruth of humanistic teaching. Thank you.
I think you may have gotten a hint listening to Henry just now as to who the narrator of tonight's film was. It's my great pleasure now to introduce William Theodore DeBerry, Ted DeBerry. If there's any member of the Columbia community who can be compared to Jacques Barzun, I think it's probably Ted DeBerry. Like Jacques, Ted began his life at Columbia as a freshman in Columbia College, received his PhD here, joined the faculty immediately thereafter, and has spent the rest of all of his life so far, and we hope many years into the future, teaching at this university. Just as Jacques was a creator of, or at least a important force in creating the field of cultural history in America, Ted DeBerry almost single-handedly created the field of Neo-Confucian studies, not just at Columbia, but in the United States. Jacques served as provost for a number of years in the 1960s, and Ted served as provost from 1971 to 1978, after which he became the James Mitchell Mason Professor of the university until his so-called retirement in 1990, although he still teaches more courses each year than any other professor in the Department of East Asian Languages and Cultures. And just as Jacques was responsible, or at least partly responsible, for the creation of the great core course, Literature and Humanities, Ted created one of the critical courses in a newer area of the core, Major Cultures, which is East Asian Languages and Civilizations, modeled on the original core courses, but bringing the values of the core and the structure of the core to a non-Western area of the world. Ted is truly one of the great citizens of Columbia, and so it's so appropriate to ask him to speak for a few minutes about another of the great citizens in our history. Ted?
Thank you, Alan, for that very generous introduction. It's typical of the graciousness which you have brought to the provostship in recent years. I wish to thank and congratulate the Society of Columbia Graduates for its successful sponsorship of this 100th birthday party for Jacques Barzun. He is known for his resistance to such celebrations. Years back, the college tried to hold a birthday party for Jacques, and he refused to go along with it. His inveterate modesty recoiled from any fuss being made over him. So this occasion is unprecedented, and the Society is to be congratulated for accomplishing what no one else has been able to do. It was in September of 1939 that I first sat in Jacques Barzun's class on the intellectual history of modern Europe. I remember the time well because it was also when I first met my future wife at Barnard, both of which meetings proved to be lifetime associations. By ordinary counting of lifetimes, it would be at least 2, but that's not even one lifetime by Jacques' standard. By that time, I had already committed myself to Chinese studies, but fortunately, in those days, we were not stricken with the rigor mortis of the majoring system. Rather, the enlightened system of maturity credits, then in effect, allowed us more room to range beyond our prime focus, to achieve a maturity in subjects other than one's so-called major. And this enabled me to study with such great teachers as Jacques, Carlton Hayes, Ernest Nagel, and many others. As a result, Jacques became my longtime mentor, and not just someone from whom I had taken a course. We remained in touch through World War II, through my graduate studies in Japanese and Chinese, and into my early years of teaching. The latter involved my setting up core courses in Asian studies, parallel to CC and literature humanities. And by this time, Jacques, first as the dean of the graduate faculties, and then as provost, rendered indispensable assistance in setting up the program. In the 60s, Jacques had a deserved reputation as a master of the Western tradition, but an undeserved one as an academic conservative, culture-bound to the West. On the contrary, he took a strong supportive role in the development of Asian studies on the level of undergraduate general education, and among other things, as editor of the Records of Civilization series, a major long-term project of the History Department and Columbia Press, he assisted in the publication of our sources of Japanese, Chinese, and Indian tradition. This same support from Jacques continued into my years as chair of the Department of Chinese and Japanese, when, among other things, he helped me to bring Donald Keene back from Cambridge to Columbia. Then later, when I found myself drafted in the crisis of 68, 69, and 70 into the role of provost, he was a tremendous resource for me with his broad knowledge and long experience at Columbia. It would have made sense in the crisis following the forced resignations of Grayson Kirk and David Truman for Jacques to be drafted as acting president. But instead, a political solution was found in the person of Andrew Cordier, with very little academic experience, who palliated the situation mostly by spending money. This produced a huge deficit that his provost, Polycarp Cush, thought to deal with by shrinking the university. Cush's policy, proclaimed under the euphemistic heading of selective excellence, was to cut out schools and programs that he thought were either economically unviable or did not measure up to the standard of excellence. Among these was the School of Library Service, already on the way out by the time I became provost. Another, and this will surprise you, was the School of the Arts. If that doesn't shock you, the next one will, the School of International Affairs. Although new at the job, I felt that I had enough knowledge and experience in international affairs simply to decide on my own that international affairs should not be sacrificed. But the School of the Arts was another matter, so I turned to Jacques for help. He still had an office on the ground floor of Low Library, so I called him on the phone and asked if I could come down and consult him about what should be done with the School of the Arts. The response was totally characteristic of him. He would be glad to discuss the matter with me, but he would come to the provost's office and not have me come to him. Respect for the office of provost overrode any consideration of seniority or juniority. This was typical of Jacques' strong sense of proper priorities, decorum, and, of course, his modesty. As a result of our talk about the School of the Arts, Jacques agreed to organize a blue ribbon committee to review the school, which later came up with a strong recommendation that it be continued and strengthened, which it was. One other program that Cush had slated for excision was Reed Hall in Paris. The property itself was quite valuable, and its sale could produce millions for reducing the deficit. Again, with the help of Jacques, of leading members of the faculty, and of Danielle Osdubosc of Barnard, we managed to remedy the fiscal mismanagement there and bring Reed Hall to a strong state of educational health, which is well recognized today. I don't know how many Columbians are aware today of the special contribution Jacques made in his promulgation of the Faculty Handbook, which spelled out the policies, practices, and standards governing academic life at Columbia. Among other things, he stated clearly the criteria for the kind of competence that warranted tenure and disposed of the shibboleth that publication was the chief qualification. Publish or perish was and is the going phrase. Of this, Jacques said in the handbook, publish or perish the thought. I am not sure, however, that publish or perish was indeed the one that perished. When I left the provostship and returned to scholarly work that had been long deferred by my administrative involvements, Jacques continued to be a source of intellectual and scholarly stimulation. At the time I was asked to give the Tanner Lectures at Berkeley, I happened to have lunch with him at the faculty house, in the course of which he asked me many questions about Confucianism in China. I decided to deal with these in my Tanner Lectures, which were later published under the title, The Trouble with Confucianism, which I dedicated to Jacques. All along, I had been in the habit of sending Jacques copies of my new books, but it was only with the publication of his latest masterwork, From Dawn to Decadence, that I realized how much more than a mere formality was his reception and acknowledgement of my books. When I first opened From Dawn to Decadence to the table of contents for Part 3, I noticed that the first chapter was entitled The Work of Mind and Heart. It dealt with the Romantic period, a subject in which Jacques had first made his great reputation for creative scholarship, and one much discussed also in that early course, which I had taken with him in 1939. But it was the title itself which caught my eye right away, The Work of Mind and Heart. I could not recall Jacques having spoken in those terms earlier, but it was an expression I had used myself in my writing on Neo-Confucianism. Then when I looked at the text itself, I found my answer. After a detailed discussion about the issues as between the Enlightenment and Romantic periods he concluded, "By the end of the story, it should appear that the present age is not simply the heir of the Enlightenment, as many complain or boast. It is also the heir of the age that corrected the Enlightenment's errors, and while adding errors of its own, deepened and amplified all the categories of art and thought." Behind the first, and this I'm still quoting from Jacques, behind the first unmistakable Romanticist works stands the thought of four men who by date and upbringing belonged to the 18th century, but were at odds with it: Rousseau, Burke, Kant, and Goethe. Rousseau, alive and dead, was studied in depth by poets and artists as well as political scientists. What his readers learned from him was that human beings are moved by passion. Thought or reason is the instrument of desires. It is not their opponent, always at war. It chooses ends and the means to fulfill them. To say this is to say that heart and mind, or mind and heart, is the single engine of moral, social, and scientific progress. And then he concluded, but not having made the point, had the Western languages had for mind and heart a single word, such as the Chinese xin, much futile debate might have been spared. At that point, there is a footnote which reads, "See William Theodore de Barry, The Message of the Mind in Neo-Confucianism." Seeing this, I felt that I had at last returned the favor to my teacher for all he had done for me over the years. The last word on the Enlightenment and Romanticism now came from the Confucians. How's that for bringing the process full circle? Finally, let me congratulate Jacques on his 100th birthday, and let me again congratulate the Society of Columbia Graduates on this wonderful tribute to a great teacher, the teacher of us all. Thank you.
I should note, after listening to Ted, that shortly after I became provost, I got in touch with him and asked to have a chance to talk with him and offered to come to his office. And Ted replied that no, faculty come to the provost's office. The provost doesn't come to theirs. So like Jacques before him, he observed the traditions of the office, perhaps more than I have. Before I introduce our next speaker, I want to just thank a few people here tonight, and particularly I want to thank Michael Garrett and Anna Longobordo, who were the co-chairs of this dinner and did so much to organize it and make it a success. And believe me, it was not always an easy task, and we're incredibly grateful to both of them for their work tonight. I also want to thank the members of the dinner committee, Alexandra Baranetsky, Peter Basilevsky, Arthur Graham Jr., Thomas Magnani, Gerald Sherwin. And then some of my fellow members of the administration who played an enormous part in helping this dinner take place. Susan Fagan, the Executive Vice President for Development and Alumni Relations, is here tonight. And two members of the staff of the President's Office, Carrie Walker and Veronica Lake, who did an enormous amount to help with this event. So, thank all of you. I'm really pleased to have a chance to introduce Kenneth Jackson. not only because he's my colleague in the history department and my good friend, but also, of course, because he is the Jacques Barzun Professor of History. Ken is perhaps the leading urban historian in the United States, the author of many extraordinary books on urban and suburban history, a major figure in the history of New York City, and one of the most beloved teachers in the recent decades at Columbia, a winner of the Great Teacher Award, like Ted and like Henry, and a wonderful friend and colleague to all of us in history. And it's my great pleasure to ask him to come up and say the last words before the presentation of the award.
Well, as Provost Brinkley said, I have an advantage that no one else in this room shares. And Jacques Barzun goes everywhere with me. Every time I write a letter of recommendation or give a speech or write an article or teach a class, Jacques Barzun's name is below mine. And it's a huge honor. I presume you can also appreciate the fact that it's a great burden. After all, I need not remind you that I could not possibly match the depth or breadth of Jacques' achievements if I were to live for 200 years. And what can I add to the wonderful tributes that have already been made of the career and achievements of this remarkable man? It stuns me to think of the changes that he has witnessed in his long life. He knew people who could remember a time before there was a Crimean War or a charge of the Light Brigade. He knew people who could remember a time before Queen Victoria was Queen Victoria, but instead was a princess. When he was born in 1907, no one had ever heard of a radio. No one had ever heard of a ship called the Titanic. Electric lighting had only recently been installed in the White House. The telephone was so uncommon that when Teddy Roosevelt would go to Sagamore Hill on Long Island for the summer White House, if he wanted to make or receive a telephone call, he had to go down to the local drugstore. When Jacques was born, only a few daredevils had been on an airplane, and only sportsmen were driving automobiles. In New York City, there was no such place as Pennsylvania Station, no Woolworth Building, no such place as the Bronx, no New York Public Library on 42nd Street, no publisher known as Alfred Knopf, no zoning, no Thanksgiving Day parade every year, no tunnel under the Hudson River, and no one had yet ever heard of Babe Ruth. Think of everything he's seen. As Dean Quigley noted, he knew World War I. He saw men march away to the first Battle of the Marne in their dark blue jackets and red trousers until they figured out that the German machine gunners just told them to kind of set those machine guns at about where the red and blue come together. And then the French army shifted to light blue uniforms, but Jacques still saw them march away and read about them at the Battle of Verdun or the Somme, the killing fields in France and Belgium that took away a whole generation of young French men. And had Jacques been, so much of life is luck. Had Jacques been born just 10, 12 years earlier, he might have been a lieutenant in the French army, in which case his chances of surviving World War I would have been low indeed. Jacques Barzun was already a professor here when Adolf Hitler was an unknown lunatic rather than just a well-known lunatic. He has seen more history than most of us can even imagine. But Jacques has not only seen history and written history, as we have heard this evening, he's made history. Rather than recount my own encounters with Jacques over the years, let me simply say that many people live long lives, but only a few enrich the lives of others to such an extraordinary extent. I was going to read many quotations from others who knew and admired Jacques Barzun over the years as an editor, as a writer, as a teacher. Let me just share one or two. From Charles Scribner, Sr., the company with which Jacques was associated for many years, and I quote, "Jacques Barzun is the best editor I have ever seen and the most efficient. He works steadily, making deft intermarginal notes that are right on target. I have not written anything in the last dozen years that Jacques didn't improve by these deft touches. I studied them to see if I could do the same for myself, but I never could. Jacques has helped ever so many writers in that same way, and none that he has helped could ever understand the mystery of his genius." Or as a writer, this one just recently I noted, "Western civilization is facing great challenges, internally and from without. If we are to escape the powers of darkness that threaten us, it will be in part because of knowledge gained from books such as those written by Professor Barzun. This is not a facile statement. It is preeminently the words and books that have enjoined the battles that will decide the eventual outcome of this world war. As never before, the battle of books is all around us, and some major weapons on all sides have titles and publication dates. I believe that Jacques Barzun is a weapon of the highest caliber." Or Jacques as a teacher. A quotation from Arthur Lyons, MD. "As a member of the Columbia College class of 1952, I was privileged to have you for several sections in contemporary civilization. The ideas which you imparted and inculcated have never lost their importance in my life. I can say without fear of contradiction that your wonderful teaching was and is your great legacy, and all of us who were given the opportunity to be in your classes have carried this legacy forward, as I know you would have wished." Jacques Barzun has turned away honors his entire life. Refused, for example, to accept an honorary degree, although he could have papered his walls with them, or to receive this great teacher award in previous years. But we persisted. As he got older, we broke down his resistance. In a weak moment, he said yes. But seriously, we are pleased and proud to recognize a true Renaissance man, a great citizen of the world, a great scholar, a great son of Columbia, and on this night of nights, a great teacher. Congratulations, Jacques. May you outlive us all. Thank you.
Well, thank you all, and you're welcome to go back to your tables. Thank you for those fascinating, insightful, and inspiring remarks. Please. And now to the presentation of the 59th Annual Great Teacher Award. Great teaching, as you have heard, more eloquently than I can state, is at the heart of Columbia. We were blessed with great teachers when we were undergraduates, and our greatest and most rewarding and enduring lessons and memories were born in the brilliant lectures and challenging discussions we enjoyed under the tutelage of great teachers. It is therefore fitting that as devoted alumni we encourage and celebrate great teaching so that the current and future students will be equally inspired and well prepared. And now for the reading to the citation, it is my pleasure to introduce Anna Longobardo. After being the first woman mechanical engineering graduate of the engineering school and later the first woman to receive the Eagleston Medal from its alumni, Anna has gone on to a stellar professional career and to serve the university in just about every conceivable capacity, including university trustee, president of the Society of Columbia Graduates, and my co-chair of the dinner this evening. For all of those and so many other accomplishments, and as chair of the Society's Great Teacher Award Committee, it falls appropriately to Anna to read the Great Teacher citation for Professor Barzun.
You're happy to know I read quickly, and also much has been said about our wonderful, really remarkable Jacques Barzun, but we do, the citation that's there was written by Kenneth Jackson. It's wonderful, so I will go over the words. The Society of Columbia Graduates has the honor of awarding the Great Teacher Award to Jacques Barzun. You entered Columbia College at the age of 15 in 1923, and over the next 3/4 of a century, as much as anyone else in the university's 253-year history, you became a part of the institution and it became a part of you. After receiving a BA degree at the top of your class in 1927 and a PhD in 1932, you rose through the ranks to become Seth Lowe Professor of History and University Professor, Columbia's highest honor. Along the way, you served as the inaugural Dean of Faculties and Provost of the university. You shaped Columbia and even redesigned its academic robes. You are well known as a luminous writer, and for at least a half century have been recognized as the most respected intellectual in the United States and its leading historian of ideas and culture. Your dozens of books have ranged over science, medicine, psychiatry, detective fiction, French poetry, art, baseball, and classical music. Your work on style, editing, and publishing, and research methods is unsurpassed. You are the greatest authority on Berlioz. The American Philosophical Society honors you annually with the Jacques Barzun Prize. You are Chevalier of the French Legion of Honor, a holder of the Gold Medal of the American Academy of Arts and Letters, and a recipient from the President of the United States of the Medal of Freedom. Your latest masterwork, From Dawn to Decadence, 500 Years of Western Cultural Life, has received high praise for its erudition and brilliance, and you published it after you were 90 years of age. Columbia honors you tonight especially for your efforts in the classroom and for your high regard for the art and craft of teaching. You led Columbia's famous historical bases of English literature with Lionel Trilling. You shaped the core curriculum as one of the creators of Humanities A. You influenced the national debate about education with your books on the teacher in America, written in 1945, and Begin Here, The Forgotten Conditions of Teaching and Learning in 1991. The Society of Columbia Graduates salutes you for being a true Renaissance man and honors you for upholding the finest tradition of teaching in this great university. This day, October 18th, 2007, Lowe Memorial Library, Columbia University in the city of New York.
Thank you so much. We have a statement from Jacques Barzun on this occasion, and Alan will read it.
Well, about 6 weeks ago, I received a letter from Jacques in response to this evening's event, and he asked me to read it to you. I am deeply moved by the honor that the Society of Columbia Graduates is conferring upon me. As one whose teaching career began virtually in college, when I did a good deal of tutoring, I could readily understand receiving a long teacher award. But the appellation of great teacher must come to anybody as a surprise and make one feel humble and grateful. This is because teaching is an activity that defies assessment, certainly assessment by the performer. It consists in the effort to change the contents of many minds at a time by removing error and inserting knowledge in its place. What an impossible task! Yet it has to be attempted, and whoever does it is lucky if the whole group of patients do not rise up and lynch the intruder into their minds. That being so, I feel doubly fortunate. Instead of the lynching, an unexpected accolade from those I used to teach and who survived the ordeal.
Thank you, Jacques, and thank you, Alan. And now I would ask you all to stand and join with Columbia's Kingsmen for the singing of Gaudiamus Igitur, an ancient song wishing long life to professors, and our alma mater, Sans Souci.
We want academia, we want professores. We want academia, we want professores. We want membrum quod libet, we want membrum quae libet, semper sint in flore, semper sint in flore. What if tomorrow brings sorrow or anything other than joy? What if the wintry chill, rainstorm or summer's thrill, tomorrow's the future still? This is today. Tomorrow's the future still. This is today. One last toast ere we part, written on every heart. This motto stay. Long may Columbia stand, honored throughout the land. Our alma mater grand, now and forever. Our alma mater grand, now and forever.
My profound thanks to my co-chair, Anna Longobardo, to our co-host, Alan Brinkley, to our dinner committee, to my wife, Sandy, and to all of you for joining together in this wonderful celebration. Please join with us next year as we again celebrate the exemplars of great teaching in the greatest city, in the greatest university. Stand Columbia. Good night to all.